In this lesson, we're going to look at another means of prematurely transferring control in a while loop, and this time we're going to look at the break statement, which will cause a loop to terminate when the break statement is encountered. First, let's look at the general form of the break before we look at a specific example. So we have our while loop with a relational expression. Then we have a series of statements. Then most likely we'll have a condition which, if true, will lead us to want to break out of the loop altogether. So we'll display it like that. And then more statements to execute, perhaps, if this relational expression is false. So again, what happens is that the loop executes normally unless this if statement or the relational expression of the if statement returns true, and then the break is executed and control is transferred to the first statement after the while loop. So we can put as a comment, break transfers control to here. And that's unlike the continue statement, which will send the control back to the top of the loop. Break takes you completely out of the loop. So let's look at a more specific example. We'll call this program break.py. What we're going to do is we're going to write the averaging program we wrote earlier. We're not going to worry about grades so much this time. We're just going to average some numbers. So I'll put a variable there, though I don't really need it this time. We'll set a total up. We'll set up an average. And then we'll also set up a count to keep track of how many numbers we're entering. So then we'll say while true. What's going to happen now is this loop is going to run continuously unless a sentinel value is entered, in which case we will then use break to stop the loop. So let's take a look at how that's going to work. So we prompt the user to enter a number. We'll get it in using raw input and convert it to float, so we can have floating point numbers if we choose to. Then we're going to say if number is equal to -1, break. Otherwise, add it to the total and increment the count by 1. And that will take us back to the top of the loop. And then when we're finished, we compute the average divided by the count and then print the average. So again, what will happen is if the number we enter is -1, then control will transfer from inside the loop to the first statement after the loop, which is where the average is calculated. So let's exit and save. And let's give it a try here. Oops, I didn't do that right. Break.py. There we go. We have a little syntax error. So let's go back into the program. Our syntax error is right here. I left off this closing parenthesis for the whole print function. Very common to do when you're typing. I'm looking at this, as I'm typing this parenthesis, I'm seeing that parenthesis as the match, when of course that's the match for this parenthesis. So I need a second closing parenthesis to fix it up. There we go. Let's clear the screen. Try it again. That's much better. Let's do some very easy calculations. So here I enter -1. -1 triggers the break. So we break out of the loop and we compute the average. Let's run it one more time with just some random numbers. That's going to really mess our average up. That's going to mess it up even more. And so there's our average. So again, break can be used anytime some condition occurs that necessitates ending the loop at that point. I wouldn't recommend writing this program in the style I've used here. I just used this style for demonstration purposes. You are better off writing this program the way I did earlier in the chapter, but I wanted to demonstrate how break works with a familiar example. With that, we're ready to leave these topics of how to prematurely transfer control out of a loop and look at a very common use of loops in programming, and that's processing text files. And we'll cover working with text files in the next 2 lessons.